These inventions are designed to save lives and prevent injury. From Formula One to bicycle helmets, it's time to buckle up. Here are the top 15 most incredible safety inventions. Number 15. Airbags. Starting off our list is something very simple, yet a device that no one ever hopes they will have to employ. Car airbags are nothing more than a fabric bag that is quickly inflated at the moment of a collision, creating a soft area between us and the hard surfaces of the car. But there was a time when these things didn't exist and proved just how dangerous and sometimes fatal a car crash can be. Early airbag models were usually just kept in the steering wheel for the driver, but inflated way too slowly and didn't offer much protection. But the concept evolved and adapted over the years into what we know today. Now we have airbags not only in steering wheels, but in the passenger side dashboard, structural pillars, curtain-style airbags for windows, and some cars come equipped with airbags for your knees. It's no secret how many people get into a car every single day all over the world, so why not make sure these 2,000-pound steel vehicles are as safe as humanly possible? Since 2015, front airbags have reduced driver fatalities by 29% and have saved well over 50,000 lives as of 2017. Number 14. 3-point seatbelts. Since we're already on the subject of automotive safety, we just have to talk about the 3-point seatbelt. The first seatbelts reach as far back as 1885 when they were invented by Edward J. Claghorn. But these were some pretty basic models. Nothing like what we have today. Sure, they were used by the likes of carriages and taxi drivers in old New York, but they were even used by painters to keep them fastened to their seats. That model quickly became the 2-point seatbelt, which wraps around the waist and isn't much different from the seatbelt used by airplane passengers. And in the mid-1950s, they began showing up in cars, but this new 2-point option was still lacking in terms of safety. After all, there's a difference between being held by the waist and having your whole body hugged. One Volvo engineer, Niels Bohlin, developed this single-unit V-shaped seatbelt, which would cover the upper torso as well. This is what we all use today, the 3-point seatbelt. Volvo would soon sell the patent, so other automakers could employ this new safety invention, and the rest, as they say, is history. Between 1975 and 2017, the 3-point seatbelt has saved about 374,000 lives. Number 13. Lifejackets. We don't always travel by automobile. Travel by sea remains to be a popular, albeit slower method of transportation for millions of people as well. And while head-on collisions at 60 miles an hour may not be the main safety concern while on board, the prospect of a watery situation is still very real. And even if you do know how to swim, battling the ocean's currents can still prove to be deadly. The history of life jackets and life preservers can be traced back to Leonardo da Vinci's 16th century journals, where he sketched out a diving suit with a life belt. But it was Norwegian seamen who are first recorded using wooden blocks and cork-stuffed vests in the early 1800s to stay afloat. By the 1850s, the British were using buoys and cork life belts, and in 1852 the US Congress required all ships to carry these early life preservers. The cork was heavy and prevented an unconscious victim's head from staying above water, so the cork was replaced with balsa wood by the time World War I came about. And by World War II, the British seamen were given the first inflatable life vests. By the 1960s, commercial aircraft were required to have inflatable life vests on board for passengers. Today, we usually scoff at life jackets when we get on a boat, but studies have shown that 80% of boating fatalities could have been prevented if the victims wore their life jackets. Number 12. Fire escape. So now that we know how to stay safe in the water, how about fires? If only there was an invention that would let us escape from fires. Well, good thing we have them, the fire escape. There was a time when buildings weren't equipped with them, and so the onset of fire proved to be infinitely deadlier. The fire escape as we know it today comes from very humble beginnings. The original fire escape device was a patented wicker basket on a pulley and chain. But if you know a thing or two about science, you'll know that wicker goes up in flames all too easily, which could only make matters worse. So in 1887, Anna Connolly came up with a much better, smarter, and all-around safer idea. She created a newer version with a bridge and railings open at both ends, which would allow a building's residents a much better escape plan. From there, Connolly's invention inspired the zigzagging metal fire escapes that folks living in the big city may be more accustomed to. Connolly's design gave those living in tenements and other cramped city housing a better shot at getting out of a fire with their lives. Number 11. Ballistic vests. A lot of times when first responders get to a crime scene, the crime is still happening, and more often than not, the bullets are, unfortunately, still flying. Those who showed up to help could easily find themselves hurt when thrusting themselves into harm's way. There had to be a way to keep them safe. Well, in 1966, a DuPont chemist named Stephanie Kwolek created the world's first ballistics vest in a very happy accident. Kwolek and her team were searching for material for stronger tires, but they would throw away the chemical solutions that didn't make the cut. When they started to weave the mixture into fiber, they ended up creating Kevlar instead of the new tire. Now, police officers aren't the only ones using Kevlar to keep themselves safe either. Kevlar is also the material used in safety helmets and firefighter turnout gear. In total, Kevlar has about 200 various applications for its use, and it's 5 times stronger than steel. Number 10. Circular saw. Hopefully no one watching this will ever find themselves put into a situation that requires the use of a circular saw, but this is still one of the greatest safety inventions ever made. It can get you out of a tight spot with ease and is an essential tool for rescuers and first responders. The circular saw was invented by Tabitha Babbitt, a weaver who one day in 1810 was watching sawmen cutting wood with a two-handed pit saw. If you've ever used a pit saw, then you know that it requires 2 people and a lot of strength and patience to use it as they pull it back and forth. Tabitha knew that the process was a complete waste of time and energy, so she created a prototype saw by attaching a circular blade to a spinning wheel, which would allow each and every movement of the saw to produce results. As long as that wheel is turning, then the saw is working. This would eventually move on to the electric model that we see firefighters use today for rescue, forcible entry, and even ventilation. Sometimes the simplest of ideas produce the greatest results. Number 9. Halo. For as long as humans have been able to run, we've been racing. We love to go fast and we love competition. And so whether we're racing via horseback or in an automobile, spills, falls, and crashes are always going to be a serious threat. And then when you add open-wheeled formula racing into the mix, things can get disastrous. But in 2016, manufacturers put together a little something called the Halo, which is a system consisting of a bar connected to 3 points on the vehicle frame and surrounds the driver's head. The original model weighed just 15 pounds, but they upped the ante the next year, making it 20 pounds. And now the Halo is created specifically for each car model. The idea came when the governing body of the racing world looked at scenarios like vehicular collisions, vehicles colliding with the environment, and vehicles colliding with debris. 3 very real scenarios out there on the track. The Halo deflects large incoming objects and provides the greatest protection so far for debris. And while the Halo was initially criticized for being less visually appealing, just like seatbelts once were, it quickly became the safety standard for Formula One racing. Number 8. Crumple Zones. If you paid any attention to your 8th grade physics teacher, then you just might remember Crumple Zones. Crumple Zones are an integral part of any automobile and can help keep you safe in the event of a head-on collision. Created by Austro-Hungarian Mercedes-Benz designer Bela Baranyi, the Crumple Zones are designed to, well, crumple, just like an accordion, to absorb the force of a collision. This way, the car won't act like a spear being thrown right into the driver during a crash. This safety feature increases the time over which a change in velocity occurs from an impact by using controlled deformation. And to put that into layman's terms, it gives the car and everyone inside an easier impact. And while it certainly doesn't take away from the fear of a crash, Crumple Zones have saved thousands of lives since their implementation in 1952. Baranyi managed to come up with 2,500 patents during his time in the auto industry, but we feel this one is the most important. Crumple Zones even made their way into trains and rail cars in more recent years. Number 7. Windshield Wipers. Another safety feature on cars that we all take for granted is the windshield wiper. It may not seem like much, but if you've ever had to drive through a rainstorm or even just a little snow flurry, we bet you were glad you had them. But there was a time when cars were made without them and drivers were left to fend for themselves against nature. and it all started with someone who had never driven a car before. Mary Anderson was an Alabama native who worked as a real estate developer, winemaker, cattle rancher, and of course, inventor. She had been visiting New York in 1902, and while taking a ride in one of the city's streetcars, she couldn't help but notice that the conductor had to open part of his windshield for better visibility. And well, if it's raining, that means the driver had to expose himself to the elements to make sure that everyone got to where they needed to be safely. So Mary Anderson sketched out something she called the window cleaning device, which was made of rubber and wood and operated manually with a lever. She patented her window cleaning device the next year in 1903, and her design would eventually become the automated windshield wipers we use today. Unfortunately, she never saw a cent from the evolution of her invention, but she was inducted into the National Inventors Hall of Fame in 2011. Not bad for someone who never learned to drive. Number 6. Laminated glass windshields. There are a lot of car-related safety innovations here because they're just that important. And the laminated windshield is not to be forgotten. Needless to say, the automobile industry has come a long way in the last century, but there was a moment in time for car owners where if something should happen to the windshield, it meant that everyone in the front, and probably even the back seat for that matter, was going to get a face full of shattered glass. The glass of the windshield was usually the same you would find in a window pane in your home, and this proved to be a big no-no. And so in 1903, the same year the windshield wiper was patented, Edouard Benedictus, a French writer, artist, and scientist, went to work on creating a better option. The story says that during one of his lab experiments, Benedictus's lab assistant accidentally left some cellulose nitrate in a beaker before storing it on the shelf. The beaker fell a few days later, but much to everyone's surprise, it didn't shatter. It didn't even break at all. He turned his discovery into a patent 6 years later in 1909, but this new invention didn't find its way to the masses until World War I, when it was used in gas mask goggles. The laminated glass finally ended up in the auto industry in the 1920s, and in 1937 it became a requirement for all new cars. Number 5. The car seat. It's hard to believe that there was a time before car seats, but believe it or not, kids were given free rein in the back seats back in the day. The first car seats were built not to keep children safe, but rather to boost them up, giving them a view out of the windshield and also keeping them in one place. The first car seat was just a burlap sack hanging from the headrest of the back seat. Thankfully, we've come a long way since then. But in 1962, two inventors came up with something that actually had the child's safety in mind. Jean Helen Ames, a British mother, designed a rear-facing seat with a Y-shaped belt to restrain children in the event of a crash, and she eventually filed patents for a 5-strap harness system in 1965. And almost simultaneously, a retired civil engineer from Denver, Leonard Rivkin, designed an iron-framed booster seat with the same 5-point harness systems after getting into a car crash with his child in the back seat. But these ideas, patents, and designs all caught on over the years, and plenty of laws and regulations later gave us the modern-day car seat. It's a good thing because car seats prevent about 15,000 infant mortalities a year. Number 4. Portable fire extinguishers. Where there's smoke, there's fire, so naturally, we have to include the fire extinguisher on this list. The first fire extinguisher on record was patented in 1723 by a chemist. He used a cask of fire extinguishing liquid and a pewter gunpowder all hooked up to a system of fuses. When the fuses were ignited, the gunpowder would explode and spread the solution everywhere. Cut to the 1800s, and the fire extinguisher we're all familiar with is born. These safety inventions may be small and often go overlooked, but they will absolutely save you from a much bigger fire, or at least suppress it until the fire department shows up. Private residences, restaurants, airplanes, everyone has them, and rightfully so. Every year, about 81% of reported fires are put out by portable extinguishers, and 75% of fires are put out without the help of firefighters. That's pretty amazing. Number 3. Bicycle helmets. You may have scoffed at your mother when she told you to wear a helmet as a kid, but she was right. Wearing a helmet may make you feel like a dork, but you'll look even dorkier when you're in a preventable accident. In the United States alone, helmets cut the risk of severe traumatic brain injury in half, and riders who wear them are 44% less likely to die from their injury and 31% less likely to break facial bones. Sure, that's a lot of statistics, but it's better to be a good statistic than a bad one. Believe it or not, the first real bicycle helmet wasn't invented until 1975 by Bell Auto Parts. It was made of a hard plastic shell padded with foam. Looking back on it, it may have been better than nothing, but not by much. And in 1984, the American National Standards Institute would introduce standards for helmets. By the 1990s, Bell would employ more of a hard shell helmet with less ventilation, but far greater coverage of the skull with more reliable materials than today. Many cities around the world are more than happy to enforce a helmet rule for bicyclists. In fact, 2/3 of cyclists who find themselves in the hospital show up with a head injury. So wear a helmet. Number 2. Smoke detector. If your house all of a sudden caught a blaze in the early 1900s, you had a 1 in 10 chance of surviving. That's not very good at all. But cut to 100 years later and those odds have increased to 1 in 100. So what happened during that time? Well, the onset of smoke alarms. Simple yet incredibly effective. Smoke alarms were first patented in 1903, but those models were obviously archaic and far less effective. Dwayne Pearsall, better known as the father of smoke detectors, would go on to invent the first battery-powered smoke alarm in the 1960s. It was called the Smoke Guard 700 and was made of fire-resistant steel and shaped like a beehive. But it was the first practical and affordable home model. They also gave consumers a better chance of getting out of a house fire in one piece, because the Smoke Guard 700 detected smoke instead of heat, which took longer to detect. By 1977, 12 million units were sold, and thousands of lives have been saved since. Number 1. Penicillin. Not everyone knows how to drive, and not everyone is getting into a car every day, but no one on Earth is safe from infection and sickness. Penicillin is not only one of the greatest discoveries of all time, but it's also one of the best safety inventions because health and safety go hand in hand. It all started in 1928 when Scottish scientist Alexander Fleming noticed some mold growing on a petri dish. That mold was the fungus Penicillium, and over the next 20 years, chemists studied and purified it to create penicillin. If you've ever needed an antibiotic, then chances are you've ingested this more than once in your life. Penicillin is able to kill harmful bacteria in the human body without actually being harmful to humans, and began to be mass-produced and advertised in 1944, and was used for soldiers overseas and children back home alike. And since it reached the masses all those years ago, the antibiotic has gone on to save an estimated 200 million lives around the world. Watch our binge-watching playlist if you'd like to watch all of our most popular top 15 videos. Grab a drink, grab a snack, and get ready to binge.